The sun was setting over the quiet frontier town, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Captain James Harper walked slowly down the main street, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust with every step. The town seemed peaceful, almost untouched, but James knew better. He had spent years in the war, and peace had always felt distant to him. Every quiet moment reminded him of the chaos he had survived, and every face seemed to hold memories he wished he could forget. James had returned to this town because it was small, because it offered a chance to disappear into the background. He wanted no attention, no conversation beyond the bare minimum. He wanted to be alone, though he did not fully understand why. His mind replayed images from the battlefield like old, broken films, the cries of soldiers, the smell of smoke and blood, the endless march of days that blurred into one another. He had fought bravely, he had survived, but the cost had been more than just the lives of comrades. It was the peace inside him that had been shattered. As he walked, James noticed the wooden buildings of the town, their faded paint and creaking signs swinging lightly in the wind. He saw children playing near a small fountain, their laughter a strange sound that made his chest ache. He had not heard laughter like that in years, and it brought both comfort and pain. Comfort because it reminded him that life still existed beyond war, and pain because it reminded him of the life he had lost, the innocence that had vanished alongside it. James's eyes wandered past the children to the outskirts of the town, where the land opened up into wide fields and sparse trees. Beyond that, the mountains rose like silent guardians. Somewhere among those hills lived the Apache community, people whose lives were intertwined with the land in ways James could barely imagine. He had heard whispers about them, about their courage, their traditions, and about a young girl named Ayanna, whose sharp eyes seemed to see everything. Her name had come to him on the lips of townsfolk, sometimes spoken with awe, sometimes with caution. She was said to be wise beyond her years, brave and fiercely independent. James paused near the edge of the street, feeling the weight of his own shadow stretch long in the evening light. He had survived battles that would have broken others, yet he felt fragile now. The war had taken more from him than he had realized. He had survived the enemy, but the true battle, the one inside himself, was far from over. He had not spoken to anyone about what haunted him, not fully. The townspeople might notice the scars on his body, the slight stiffness in his movements, but they could not see the scars on his mind. At the inn where he had decided to stay, James found a small room with a single bed and a window that looked out onto the river beyond the town. The room smelled faintly of wood polish and old smoke, but it was quiet, and that was enough. He dropped his bag to the floor and sank onto the bed, feeling the weight of exhaustion press down on him. Sleep came reluctantly, but even in rest, the war seemed to follow him. He dreamed of the battlefield, of fallen comrades, of fires that never went out. When he awoke, it was with a start, as if he had been running in his dreams and had nowhere to go. Days passed slowly. James wandered the town during the mornings, keeping to himself, avoiding eye contact where possible. He watched the market, the blacksmith shaping metal with rhythmic blows, the baker kneading dough. Life went on in the town, slow and steady, and he envied it even as he tried to ignore it. Sometimes, when the wind carried voices across the fields, he imagined what it must be like to live freely, without memories of war pressing down on every step. One afternoon, James ventured farther than he had before, walking toward the river that curled like a silver ribbon through the outskirts. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the sound of its movement was almost musical. He knelt at the riverbank, cupping his hands to drink, and felt a strange calm wash over him. For a moment, he imagined that he could leave the war behind completely, that he could shed the weight of the past, like a heavy coat. But then, as always, the memories returned, unbidden and insistent. He saw the faces of friends who had died, the chaos, the smoke, the screams. He shook his head, trying to push it away, but the images lingered like shadows. It was then that he noticed her. She was standing across the river, a small figure against the wide expanse of the landscape. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. James could not take his eyes off her. There was something about the way she carried herself, calm, strong, observant, that made him both uneasy and fascinated. He did not know her, yet somehow he felt that she understood things he could not explain. She was Ayanna, the girl he had heard about. Her dark hair framed a face that was serious and thoughtful, and her eyes, sharp and steady, seemed to see him even from across the distance. James wanted to speak, to introduce himself, but the words stuck in his throat. He was not used to talking to people without armor, without the walls of command and authority that the army had taught him to wear. Yet something in her gaze drew him forward. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her, feeling as if each step took him closer not just to her, but to something he had thought lost forever, the possibility of connection. Ayanna did not move as he neared. She merely continued to watch the river, as if he were part of the scenery rather than a stranger entering her space. James stood beside her in silence, unsure what to say. The wind rustled the leaves around them, carrying the soft scent of wildflowers and earth. For a long moment, neither spoke, and yet James did not feel uncomfortable. There was a presence in her quiet that matched his own, a patience, a strength, a stillness born from enduring hardships. Finally, he whispered, almost to himself, "I haven't slept beside a woman since the war." The words were strange, even as they left his lips, and he felt vulnerable saying them. He did not know why he admitted such a thing to a stranger, a girl from a world so different from his own. But somehow it felt necessary. Ayanna turned her gaze to him fully for the first time. She did not laugh, nor did she judge. She merely looked at him with an intensity that made him feel exposed and understood all at once. Her eyes seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. Yet there was also curiosity, as if she were trying to unravel the story behind his pain. James wanted to explain more, but he could not. Words seemed useless in the face of the silence between them. Instead, he simply stood there, letting the river and the wind speak where he could not. Over the next few days, James continued to return to the river. Each time he found Ayanna there, often in the same spot, observing the water, her thoughts private but somehow shared with him. He began to notice small details, the way she touched the river stones, the way she listened to the birds, the patience in her movements. He realized that she was teaching him a different kind of lesson, that life could continue even after unimaginable pain, that strength could exist in quiet observation, in respect for the world and for oneself. James felt a shift within himself, subtle but undeniable. He began to speak more, not about the war, not yet, but about small things, the beauty of the river, the colors of the sky, the way the wind felt on the skin. Ayanna responded with nods, small gestures, sometimes a word or two in her soft, melodic voice. Trust began to form, slowly, like a fragile bridge stretching between two wounded hearts. He thought about the war constantly, but now the memories no longer controlled him entirely. They were part of him, yes, but they no longer defined him. In the presence of Ayanna and the calm of the river, he felt a flicker of something he had not felt in years. Hope. Hope that he could survive not just the world of war, but the world of life itself. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find companionship again, even in the most unexpected of places. And so, As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, James Harper, soldier, survivor, haunted man, stood quietly by the river, watching the water and the girl who had unknowingly begun to change the course of his life. In that moment, he realized that the world was wider, stranger, and more beautiful than he had remembered. And he understood, in a way he could not yet put into words, that his journey had only just begun. The next morning, Captain James Harper woke to the faint light of dawn spilling through the small window of his room at the inn. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and the river beyond the town. Despite his restless nights, he felt a strange pull toward the river, as if it were calling him. He dressed quickly, pulled on his worn boots, and stepped outside, letting the soft morning wind brush against his face. He walked slowly through the town, noticing the townsfolk beginning their day. The baker lifted fresh bread from the oven, sending its warm aroma into the street. Children chased one another near the fountain, their laughter lighter than the sound of their previous day's play. James kept his distance, careful not to intrude, yet he could not help glancing toward the river, wondering if Ayanna would be there again. Sure enough, as he reached the edge of the town, he saw her. She stood by the riverbank, her posture straight, her gaze fixed on the water. The way she moved, deliberate, unhurried, captured him. She seemed part of the river itself, calm yet powerful, observing everything without disturbing its natural flow. James hesitated for a moment, considering whether to approach. Then, remembering the strange trust that had grown between them, he took a slow step forward. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice almost blending with the sound of the flowing water. Ayanna turned her eyes to him, but she did not respond with words. Instead, she nodded once, acknowledging his presence without breaking her calm demeanor. James understood that she did not need to speak to communicate. Her silence was not cold. It was a kind of strength, a quiet that spoke volumes. James moved closer, settling onto a smooth rock near the riverbank. He watched the water ripple and dance in the early light. He wanted to talk, but he did not know where to begin. How could he explain the years of war, the nights of sleepless torment, the weight of memories that clung to him like shadows? Words had always felt inadequate, but he knew he needed to try, even if only a little. I don't usually come here," he began, speaking slowly, as if measuring every word. "Not for peace, not for anything other than what I have to do. But now it feels different. It feels like I'm meant to be here." Ayanna tilted her head slightly, studying him with those sharp, dark eyes. She said nothing, but James could sense her curiosity. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a careful observation, as if she were trying to understand him without rushing him. That thought gave him a strange comfort. For so long, people had tried to fix him, to push him into conversations and actions he could not manage, but she seemed willing to wait. He took a deep breath and continued. "I haven't slept beside a woman since the war," he whispered, repeating the words from the day before. I can't. I can't trust myself to care, to feel safe, not anymore." Ayanna's eyes softened just slightly, a subtle warmth breaking through her measured expression. She still did not speak, but she did not turn away. Her presence alone felt like an answer, a kind of reassurance that he did not have to explain everything at once. He realized with a quiet shock that he felt seen. Truly seen, for perhaps the first time since he had left the battlefield. Days passed in similar patterns. James would come to the river, and Ayanna would be there, silently observing. Sometimes they would exchange words, simple phrases about the weather or the river, nothing heavy. Other times, they would remain in silence. The quiet between them filled with understanding. Slowly, James began to tell fragments of his story, not the full horrors, but enough to hint at the depths of his suffering. He spoke of nights spent on foreign soil, of friends lost to battles he could not forget, of a body and mind that had endured more than they should. Ayanna listened, never interrupting, never offering empty words of comfort. Instead, she would simply nod, or gesture toward the river, or touch a stone in her hand, teaching him the patient rhythm of life that had always guided her people. Through her, James began to see that healing did not always come from speaking or acting. Sometimes it came from observing, from learning to exist in the quiet spaces between words and thoughts. One afternoon, as the sun reached its peak, James noticed something new in Ayanna's behavior. She was gathering small bundles of herbs along the riverbank, carefully selecting each one with attention and care. Her hands moved with a practiced precision, yet her expression was gentle, thoughtful. James watched, fascinated. He had never paid much attention to plants or the ways of the natural world, but seeing her work awakened a curiosity he had long suppressed. "Why do you do that?" he asked, unable to contain his question any longer. Ayanna paused, looking at him with that same intensity that always made him feel both exposed and understood. She did not speak immediately. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "These are for healing, for my people, for the earth, for balance." James nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the deeper meaning behind her words. Healing, balance, care, concepts that had been foreign to him in the chaos of war, suddenly felt tangible. He realized that she was teaching him something without even trying, guiding him gently toward the possibility of living again. As days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. James began to anticipate her presence, finding comfort in her calm demeanor and quiet wisdom. He began to notice small things about her. The way her fingers traced patterns on stones, the faint smile that appeared when the sun hit the water just right, the way she seemed to listen to the world with a patience he could not yet master. Each observation chipped away at the walls he had built around himself. Yet the shadow of his past remained. Some nights, James would wake from troubled sleep, drenched in sweat, haunted by memories of the battlefield. He would think of the men he had lost, the screams that had echoed in his ears, and the violence that had defined so much of his life. He feared that these shadows would never leave him, that he would always be too broken to move forward. But then he would return to the river, and Ayanna would be there. She never forced him to speak or explain. She never pushed him to act or feel in ways he was not ready. Her presence alone was enough to remind him that there was life beyond his pain, that there could be hope even in the midst of despair. Slowly, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could survive not only the war, but the life that followed it. One evening, as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, James found the courage to ask a question he had avoided for weeks. "Do you ever feel afraid?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ayanna looked at him, her expression thoughtful. Then she nodded slowly. "Of course," she said, "but fear is not weakness. It is part of living. It tells us what is important, what we must protect." James considered her words carefully. In the war, fear had been constant, but it had never been a guide. It had been a trap, a chain that bound him to endless anxiety and pain. Ayanna's perspective was different. Fear as a guide, fear as a teacher. It was a concept he had never allowed himself to consider. But somehow, in her presence, it made sense. The evening air grew cooler, and James realized he had been talking for hours, sharing pieces of himself he had never given to anyone before. Ayanna had listened, always with patience, never rushing him, never judging. And in that simple act of listening, she had given him something no one else could: the possibility of trust. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, James felt a lightness he had not known in years. He did not feel fully healed, nor did he expect to. But he felt a shift, subtle but profound within himself. The river, the quiet presence of Ayanna, the gentle rhythm of their shared silence. All of it reminded him that life could continue, that wounds could begin to close, that even a man haunted by war could find connection and understanding. For the first time in a long while, James Harper allowed himself to hope. Hope that he could survive not just the battles of the past, but the challenges of the present. Hope that he could learn to trust again, to feel again, to live again, and perhaps, most unexpectedly, hope that he might find companionship. A gentle presence that could help him navigate the complex landscape of both grief and joy. And so, with the river flowing steadily beside them, with the wind carrying the quiet music of the land, James and Ayanna continued to meet each day. Not as teacher and student, nor as rescuer and rescued, but as two individuals quietly learning from one another. Through shared silence, careful words, and simple presence, they began a journey of healing and understanding, one that neither had expected but both needed. The days were still long, and the past was never far away. But with Ayanna beside him, James felt a glimmer of something he had thought lost forever, the possibility of peace, even amidst the shadows of memory. And in that quiet hope, he discovered a truth more powerful than any lesson from war. That connection, patience, and understanding could mend even the most broken of hearts. The days at the river grew warmer as spring settled over the land, and with the warmth came a sense of life that James Harper had almost forgotten existed. He and Ayanna had settled into a quiet rhythm. Each morning he would walk from the inn toward the river, and she would be waiting there, already in motion, moving among the stones and wildflowers, observing the world with her calm, deliberate attention. Their companionship was unusual, a mix of silence and conversation, observation and trust. It was a strange and gentle kind of friendship, built not on words alone, but on understanding and presence. One afternoon, James arrived at the river to find Ayanna sitting on a large, flat rock, her feet dangling over the edge as she traced shapes in the water with a small stick. The sunlight danced across the surface, reflecting in patterns that seemed alive. James felt a familiar pull in his chest, a mix of curiosity, admiration, and a cautious hope. "Good afternoon," he said softly, careful not to startle her. Ayanna glanced at him and smiled faintly, a subtle warmth in her expression that made James's heart feel both heavy and light at once. "Afternoon," she replied, her voice steady and calm. It carried the weight of someone accustomed to listening, to observing, and to understanding more than she spoke. James sat beside her, letting his eyes follow the gentle flow of the river. The silence stretched comfortably between them. For a long moment he said nothing, unsure where to begin. Then, taking a deep breath, he started to speak. "Do you ever feel like everything you've been through is too heavy to carry?" Ayanna considered him carefully. She did not answer immediately, but her eyes softened, as if she were trying to measure his words and understand the weight behind them. Finally, she spoke. "Yes. But the weight does not have to break you. Sometimes it teaches you. It teaches patience. It teaches strength." James nodded slowly, absorbing her words. She spoke of patience and strength, as if she had lived these lessons herself, as if life had tested her in ways that he could only imagine. He wondered what she had endured, what battles she had fought silently. Her calmness was not just serenity. It was resilience, born of experience. Encouraged by her openness, James began to share more of his past, not all of it, but pieces that had long been locked away. He spoke of the battlefield, of nights spent in fear and cold, of comrades lost and dreams shattered. He spoke of the loneliness, the endless silence after the chaos, and the fear that he might never feel safe or whole again. Words that had once felt impossible to say now tumbled out, carried not by desperation, but by trust. Ayanna listened attentively, never interrupting, never offering empty comfort. She nodded occasionally, and her eyes reflected an understanding deeper than sympathy. She understood grief, loss, and endurance in a way that resonated with James. For the first time in years, he felt heard, not just the words, but the pain behind them. When he paused, unsure of what to say next, Ayanna reached for a small stone and held it out to him. "Carry this," she said quietly. "When the weight becomes too much, hold it. Let it remind you of the earth, of life, of balance." James accepted the stone with a gentle hand, feeling its smooth surface. The gesture was simple, but it held a significance that words could not capture. It was a reminder that even in pain, there could be connection, grounding, and something steady to hold on to. After a long silence, Ayanna spoke again, sharing stories of her own life. She told him about her people, about the ways they had survived for generations, about the lessons passed down through families and elders. She spoke of the importance of the land, of respecting every living thing, and of finding strength in community. Her voice was calm but firm, and each story carried the weight of experience, of challenges faced and overcome. James listened, fascinated. The world she described was so different from the battlefields he had known, yet it was not unfamiliar in its truths. Struggle, survival, and resilience existed everywhere. Only the forms they took were different. He realized that while he had been trained to survive war, she had been trained to survive life, to endure loss, and to find strength in ways that he had never learned. Days turned into weeks, and their conversations grew deeper. They began to share their hopes, fears, and dreams, not grand or ambitious, but small personal visions of a life worth living. James admitted his fear of never being able to connect with another person, of being trapped in the shadow of his past. Ayanna shared her concern for her people, for the preservation of their traditions, and for the fragility of the natural world around them. Together, they discovered a shared understanding that life was fragile, precious, and full of challenges, yet also full of possibilities for connection and growth. One afternoon, as they walked along the riverbank, Ayanna stopped to point out a bird building a nest. "See how it works," she said softly. "It does not rush. It does not give up. It continues, even when the wind blows hard. Life is like that. We must continue, even when the world feels heavy." James watched the bird, then nodded. "I think I understand," he said. "Not fully, but I feel it." He realized that her words were not just about nature. They were about him, about the slow work of healing, about the patience he needed to rebuild his life after so much loss. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, they sat together on a large rock, letting the river's soft murmur fill the silence. James felt a strange sense of peace. He had begun to understand that healing was not instant, nor was it linear. There would be days of darkness and nights of restless sleep, but there could also be moments of light, of connection, and of understanding. Ayanna looked at him, her eyes steady and thoughtful. "You carry much?" she said quietly. "But you are not alone. Not here. Not with the river. Not with me." James felt a warmth in his chest he had not known in years. Her words were simple, but their meaning was profound. For the first time since leaving the war, he felt that someone truly saw him. Not as a soldier, not as a survivor, not as a broken man, but as a person, someone worthy of trust, care, and connection. He smiled faintly, a gesture that felt foreign yet comforting. "Thank you," he said. I am beginning to understand. I can survive this. I can carry it and not be crushed by it." Ayana nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. Her presence was steady, her calm unwavering, and James realized that this was more than companionship. It was guidance, subtle and gentle, teaching him how to live with his past rather than be consumed by it. As twilight approached, James and Ayana prepared to leave the riverbank. He glanced at the water, shimmering under the last light of the day, and felt a sense of hope he had long thought impossible. The war, the memories, the pain, they were still there, lingering like shadows. But now he carried them differently. He carried them alongside understanding, patience, and the quiet trust of someone who had begun to see life anew. Walking back toward the town, James realized that his time with Ayana had changed him. Not dramatically, not in ways that could be measured easily, but in the subtle shifts of perspective and heart. He was learning that connection and understanding could heal what war had broken, that patience and presence could rebuild what had been lost, and that the quiet strength of another could illuminate paths through even the darkest memories. That night, as James lay in his small room at the inn, he held the stone Ayana had given him and thought of the river, of the flowing water, and of the girl who had taught him to begin trusting again. The memories of war still haunted him, but for the first time he did not feel completely trapped. There was a path forward, faint but real, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future where fear and grief did not dominate his every thought. And as sleep finally came, he dreamed not only of battles and loss, but of the river, the stones, and the steady, watchful presence of Ayana. In those dreams, he felt a sense of companionship, of hope, and of the quiet power of trust, a power that neither time nor memory could erase. Spring slowly gave way to summer, and the days grew longer, warmer, and brighter. The frontier town felt alive in a way that James Harper had almost forgotten. Flowers bloomed along the riverbank, the air carried the scent of earth and growing grass, and birds sang melodies that seemed to echo his own tentative hope. The world around him seemed to breathe, and for the first time in a long while, he began to feel part of it. James had continued his daily visits to the river, and each day Ayana was there. She moved with her usual grace and patience, tending to the small rituals of her life, gathering herbs, observing the water, and caring for the land in subtle, deliberate ways. James watched her closely, learning not just about her, but about life itself. He had started to understand that strength did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, persistent and steady, guiding those who paid attention. One morning, as James approached the river, he noticed Ayana standing near a cluster of trees, her gaze focused on something in the distance. He followed her eyes and saw a small group of townspeople approaching, their expressions wary and suspicious. James felt a tightening in his chest. He had grown used to his solitude, to the quiet world he and Ayana had created together, and the presence of others, especially strangers with uncertain intentions, felt threatening. Ayana seemed to sense his unease. She placed a hand on his arm, a gentle but firm touch, and whispered, "Do not fear. We can face this together." Her words carried a calm authority, and James felt himself steady under her quiet confidence. For the first time, he realized that he did not have to face challenges alone. He had someone by his side who understood not only the world outside, but also the storms within him. The group of townspeople approached, their eyes flicking between James and Ayana. They were curious, cautious, and some were openly suspicious. One man, taller than the others and carrying the air of authority, stepped forward. "You're the soldier, aren't you?" he asked, his tone more accusatory than friendly. "What are you doing near our river talking with her?" James straightened, feeling a surge of defensiveness. He wanted to respond with anger or distance, but Ayana shook her head subtly, reminding him of patience. He took a deep breath and said calmly, "I come here because it is quiet, because it is peaceful. Ayanna and we are friends." The man frowned, unconvinced. "Friends? You know nothing of her people. You know nothing of the land." James paused, then spoke again, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps not. But I am learning, and I am trying to understand." Ayanna stepped forward, her presence commanding yet serene. "He does not need to know everything," she said softly. "He needs only to respect what he has seen and learned. That is enough for now." The group exchanged glances, some nodding reluctantly. The tension eased slightly, though caution remained. James realized that Ayanna's words had done more than protect him. They had guided the situation toward understanding rather than conflict. Her calm strength was something he had never encountered, and he felt both admiration and gratitude. After the townspeople left, James and Ayanna continued along the riverbank. James's mind was alive with thoughts, but he found himself focusing less on fear and more on understanding. He realized that challenges, both from the past and in the present, could be faced with patience and composure. And he understood that he was no longer the man who had arrived in town weeks ago, wounded, cautious, and withdrawn. He was changing, slowly, shaped by trust, guidance, and quiet companionship. Later that afternoon, they came upon a fallen tree near the water's edge. James paused, glancing at the rough bark and tangled roots. "We could clear this," he suggested. "Make it easier to walk along the river." Ayanna smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It is not an obstacle, only a challenge. Sometimes the land teaches us patience by giving us resistance." James considered her words and felt a spark of understanding. In his life, challenges had often been met with force or avoidance, yet Ayanna's approach was different. She faced difficulties with awareness and care, embracing them as opportunities for growth rather than threats. He began to see that his own life, scarred by war and loss, could be approached in the same way, acknowledging pain, yet not letting it dominate him. Over the next few days, James and Ayanna worked together on small tasks along the river. They gathered herbs, cleared paths gently, and shared knowledge about the land. Each task was simple, yet each carried lessons in patience, observation, and collaboration. Through these moments, James learned to rely not just on his own strength, but on the quiet power of shared effort. Ayanna's guidance was gentle but firm, teaching him that true strength often came from trust and cooperation, not force or control. One evening, as the sky turned shades of gold and pink, James spoke softly. "I've been afraid for so long," he admitted. "Afraid of what I have seen, afraid of what I might feel, afraid of failing again." Ayanna listened carefully, her expression calm. She did not interrupt or offer platitudes. Instead, she simply said, "Fear is part of life, James. It shows us what matters. You have not failed. You have survived, and you continue to face each day." Her words resonated deeply. James realized that he had been measuring himself by the standards of the past, the battlefield, the loss, the constant danger. But Ayanna's perspective offered a new measure: presence, resilience, and the courage to continue, even in the face of fear. He felt a shift within himself, a subtle but profound transformation. The following week brought another test. A sudden storm rolled across the town and river, wind and rain lashing the banks. Trees bent under the force of the wind, and the river swelled with rushing water. James and Ayanna found shelter under a large rock overhang, the storm pounding around them. James felt the familiar fear rising, the instinct to retreat or panic. Ayanna remained calm, her eyes steady as she guided him to sit beside her. "Focus on the present," she said softly. "Not the past, not the future. The storm will pass. We will be safe here. Trust in what you can control and accept what you cannot." James followed her advice, taking deep breaths, feeling the cold rain on his skin, and letting the sound of the storm surround him rather than consume him. He realized that he was learning not just to endure external challenges, but to face internal ones: fear, doubt, and the lingering shadows of war. With Ayana's guidance, he was discovering a new way to live, aware, present, and capable of hope. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to find the river glistening under the renewed sunlight. The world seemed brighter, fresher, and somehow renewed. James felt a deep sense of gratitude for Ayana, for her patience, her wisdom, and her unwavering presence. She had shown him that trust and understanding could transform fear into strength, that healing was possible, and that even a man haunted by war could find peace in companionship. As they walked back to town, James reflected on the journey he had undertaken since arriving. He had come seeking solitude, expecting only quiet and distance. Instead, he had found connection, understanding, and a gentle guide who taught him the art of living fully despite pain. He realized that the true battles were not those fought with weapons, but those fought within, against fear, grief, and isolation. And he felt ready, for the first time in years, to face those battles with courage. That evening, James sat by the river alone for a while, thinking of the days past and the lessons learned. He thought of the storm, of the town, and of the quiet strength of Ayana. He realized that transformation was not a sudden event, but a slow process, shaped by patience, guidance, and trust. And he understood that his journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt and fear, but he no longer felt powerless. He had begun to reclaim his life, and with Ayana by his side, he felt capable of facing whatever came next. As night fell and stars appeared above, James allowed himself to hope. Hope that he could continue to grow, to heal, and to find companionship. Hope that the lessons of patience, trust, and understanding could carry him through not just the shadows of the past, but the challenges of the future. And as he returned to the inn that night, he felt a quiet confidence he had not known in years, a sense that he was no longer defined solely by the war he had survived, but by the strength he was learning to build within himself. The summer days passed slowly, stretching into long golden evenings that seemed to hang in the air like honey. James Harper felt a sense of calm he had not known in years. The war, the fear, and the memories of loss still lingered in the corners of his mind, but they no longer controlled him entirely. Each day with Ayana at the riverbank, each quiet conversation and shared moment of presence had strengthened him in ways he had not realized were possible. One morning, James arrived at the river earlier than usual. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers, and the sunlight danced on the water's surface, making it sparkle like tiny diamonds. He saw Ayana already there, moving with her usual calm grace. She was tending to the small herbs she had collected over the past weeks, carefully placing each bundle in the shade to dry. James approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt her, but she looked up and smiled, that faint, steady smile that had become so comforting. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning," she replied, her voice warm and steady. There was a lightness in her expression, a sense of shared understanding that he had come to cherish. They began their walk along the riverbank together, their steps slow, unhurried, as they often did. James felt a deep sense of gratitude for the routine they had established, for the quiet companionship that had become a foundation for his healing. He no longer feared the silence between them. It was comfortable, filled with understanding, rather than emptiness. After a while, they paused near a large, flat stone by the river. James looked at Ayanna, noticing the strength and calm in her presence, the way she seemed so in tune with the world around her. He felt a surge of emotion he had learned to recognize but had seldom allowed himself to feel fully. Hope. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quiet, almost hesitant, "about everything. About the past, about the war, about the life I've been trying to rebuild." Ayanna turned to him, her dark eyes steady and attentive. "And what have you realized?" she asked gently. "That I cannot do it alone," he said. "I thought I could. Just bury the past, push everyone away. But I see now that strength is not only in surviving alone. It's in trusting, in connecting, in letting someone help you carry the weight." Ayanna nodded, her expression softening. "It takes courage to admit that," she said. "Many never learn it, or they learn it too late." James felt a warmth in his chest at her words. For so long he had been closed off, guarding his heart against the world, believing that connection was too dangerous, too fragile. But now he understood that trust and companionship were not weaknesses. They were paths to strength. And he had found that path patiently and quietly, with her guidance. They spent the day near the river gathering herbs, observing the birds, and sharing small stories. James began to speak more freely about his hopes for the future, tentative as they were. He spoke of wanting to rebuild a life that included connection, purpose, and moments of joy he had almost forgotten existed. Ayanna listened attentively, offering insight, gentle encouragement, and the quiet support that had become his anchor. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the river, James and Ayanna sat together on a large rock. The water shimmered in the golden light, and the wind rustled the leaves in a soothing rhythm. For a long moment, they simply watched the river flow, feeling the steady pulse of life around them. "I never thought I could feel this way again," James said softly. "Not after the war. Not after everything." Ayanna turned to him, her eyes reflecting both understanding and quiet strength. "Healing is not instant," she said. "It comes slowly, like the river carving the stones. You have been patient, and you have learned. That is why you feel this now." James felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt a measure of peace within himself. The war, the loss, the fear, they were still parts of him, but they no longer defined him. He had begun to reclaim his life, not by forgetting the past, but by learning to live with it, guided by trust, patience, and the quiet strength of another. Over the next few days, their bond deepened further. They shared more of their lives with one another, not in grand gestures or declarations, but in small, meaningful moments. James learned more about Ayanna's community, their traditions, and their deep connection to the land. She shared stories of her ancestors, of lessons learned from generations past, and James found himself captivated by the wisdom she carried. In turn, James shared his own experiences, not as a soldier, but as a man learning to live again. He spoke of the moments of fear and doubt, of the nights he had spent haunted by memories, and of the slow process of rebuilding trust in both himself and the world. Ayanna listened without judgment, her presence a constant reassurance that he was not alone in this journey. One evening, a small fire crackled near the riverbank as they prepared a simple meal. The sky was painted with the deep purples and reds of sunset, and the stars began to emerge, twinkling above like distant lanterns. James glanced at Ayanna, feeling a mixture of admiration, respect, and something deeper he had not yet named. "You've taught me more than I could have imagined," he said softly. "Not about war or survival, but about life itself, about patience, trust, hope." Ayana smiled gently. "You had to learn it yourself," she said. "I only showed the way. You took it, step by step." James nodded, feeling a sense of completion in that statement. He had come to the river carrying the weight of his past, haunted by memories he could not shake. But now he felt lighter, stronger, and more capable of embracing life. He had been transformed not by force or command, but by understanding, connection, and the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen much and endured more. As night fell, James and Ayana walked along the river one last time for the evening. The moon reflected in the water, casting silver light on the path ahead. James felt a sense of peace he had not known in years, a feeling that life could continue, even after pain, even after loss. He realized that the journey was ongoing, but he no longer feared it. With Ayana by his side, he felt capable of facing whatever lay ahead. They paused on a small hill overlooking the river, the wind soft against their faces. James took a deep breath and felt the weight of his past lift, even if only slightly. He had survived war, endured loss, and faced fear, yet here he was, standing in a world that still offered beauty, connection, and hope. "You have changed me," he said quietly, turning to Ayana. "Not in ways that I can fully explain, but I am different now. Better, I think. Stronger." Ayana looked at him with her calm, steady gaze. "And you have changed yourself," she replied. "I only helped you see what was already there. You carried the courage within you all along." James smiled, a true, heartfelt smile that felt like it had been buried for years. In that moment, he felt a sense of wholeness, fragile yet undeniable. He realized that healing was not a destination, but a journey, one that required patience, trust, and the willingness to accept support and connection. Over the following weeks, James and Ayana continued their walks along the river, their conversations and silences growing richer, more comfortable, and deeply meaningful. James began to feel fully alive again, experiencing moments of laughter, wonder, and joy that he had thought lost forever. He had found companionship, not as a remedy for his pain, but as a source of understanding and strength that complemented his own resilience. As summer turned toward early autumn, James understood that his life had been transformed. He was no longer defined solely by the war he had endured, but by the journey of healing and trust he had undertaken. The river, the land, and the quiet wisdom of Ayana had taught him lessons that no battlefield ever could. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, James and Ayana stood by the river, watching the light shimmer on the water. James took a deep breath, feeling a sense of hope, peace, and gratitude. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer held power over his future. Ayana looked at him, her eyes calm and understanding. "The journey continues," she said softly. "But you are ready for it now." James nodded, feeling a quiet determination. With her by his side, he knew that he could face whatever came next, not as a haunted soldier, but as a man capable of connection, courage, and hope. And in that moment, he allowed himself to fully believe that life, despite its challenges, was beautiful, and that he was ready to live it, fully and bravely, alongside someone who had shown him the true meaning of trust and companionship. As night fell and the stars glittered above, James Harper felt a sense of completion. He had come to the river carrying the weight of his past, and he would leave it stronger, wiser, and more alive than he had ever imagined. He had learned that healing was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, and that even after the darkest times, life could offer light, hope, and companionship. And as he and Ayana walked back to the town together, the river flowing steadily beside them, James understood something he had never allowed himself to believe before, that he could survive, not only the shadows of war, but the challenges of life itself, and that he could do so with someone he trusted, respected, and cared for deeply by his side.